Acolytes. Boo. Let's continue with. I think my grandfather might be a serial killer. Last time was pretty crazy, so let's just continue.
Though it happens even quicker. One moment the person, next moment the monster, or to be more accurate, they are both the monster, just with different strengths and weaknesses inherent to each form. Both are capable of doing a great deal of harm, and I've seen more than a few that seem to rarely change at all to their other form. Their goals don't require it, I guess. When I had this place set up, I redoubled my efforts to learn more about them and those goals. I have a very secure closed-circuit filtration system running into that room so I can control if there's air or not, and pump in gas to sedate or kill if I need to. The system has no ties to the other ventilation down there, so even if one of those things turned into a mist, it couldn't get out once the room is sealed. Though I doubt that's a possibility in any case. One of the consistencies I have found between all these outsiders is that their non-human form is always at least semi-solid and is never so small that it can't house the seed. The seeds do show up on MRIs if you know what to look for, but for obvious reasons, I've never been able to scan one in creature form. But I believe the seed is the key. It acts like a gateway between this reality and wherever those things come from. What looks like a transformation is actually a swapping of sorts. But if you destroy the seed, you destroy the gateway. And if you kill the human body, the seed will dissolve approximately 37 minutes after brain death. That's by design, I think, just like most of this is by design. As he had talked, my grandfather had been animated telling about his encounter with Kolchak, but that life had drained away as he talked about all he had learned. Now he was silent a moment, staring off with a melancholy expression, before looking back to me and forcing a smile. He leaned forward and tapped the table. Did you notice the wire mesh in front of the camera in the video? Did you see those wire boxes in the vault? I nodded, and he went on. When I first captured one and put it in the vault, I set up 2 camcorders to record what happened. I didn't think there was any real risk of it getting out, and I had gas ready if I needed to knock it out or kill it, at least assuming that gas would work, because again, you can never assume anything is certain with these things.
You have to,
in
but then
any
test
case,
it, yes.
I lock it in, it wakes up, it transforms for a while and tries to get out. I can hear it beating against the door. Then it tries swapping back to the person, a pretty woman who ran a wedding boutique in Memphis, and I can just barely hear her screaming and crying as sympathetically as she could muster through the wall. I hit the gas, go in and deal with her, and then I check the video. The videos were blank, and the cameras were fried. I figured out that whenever the swap happens, it sends out a short but very strong electromagnetic pulse, kills electronics and lights in about a 40-foot radius around it. That's why my stun gun had died fighting Kolchak, and that's why my cameras got toasted. I nodded. So you built Faraday cages around cameras to shield them? He laughed and nodded. Exactly. Very good. They aren't perfect, but between the shielding on the cameras themselves and the mesh, for the most part I can capture decent footage now. His expression was lighter for a moment, but my next question brought back the look I had feared since we left our fight with the house earlier in the day. So you talked about them having goals. Have you figured out what the point of what they're doing actually is, or is it just random? He frowned, looking thoughtful for a moment and seeming to consider his next words carefully. I don't know what the overarching plan is, no, though I could guess it is a stage of some larger campaign to encroach upon or infect our world with their malignity. But that there is a plan, and intelligent design is hard to deny at this point. He leaned forward, tapping his fingers individually as he made his points. First, The seeds are designed to take over people and also provide an extremely efficient method of bringing over this other form, all while appearing to bridge and share consciousness between the two forms. Could that be naturally occurring through some evolutionary process? Possible, but unlikely, given the supernatural component and how perfectly it aligns with their apparent goals of infiltrating this world without notice and creating pain and death. Second, consider that this all occurs without altering the DNA or most biological processes of the human form. There was no indication in Salk's tissue samples that he was other than human, and while his blood unquestionably has some unique properties, it was nothing that raised red flags during routine testing at the hospital. And I can tell you that I have run exhaustive tests on these things over the years and never found any trace of anything abnormal other than the seed itself, which somehow manages to self-destruct less than an hour after death, leaving no trace that it was ever there. He sighed and looked away for a second. I could see he was on the verge of crying, but he held it in check, looking back at me with his iron gaze as he spoke. Third, look at who they target to take over. I have encountered close to 100 of these outsiders in just over 30 years. My guess is that there are at most a few thousand of them in the world right now, maybe less. But without fail, to the extent I can figure out what an outsider's individual goal is, the person they have taken is in a good position to accomplish it. It's not random. It's part of some broader plan. He rubbed his mouth and went on. I also know that they have to be able to control and plan precisely who gets a seed. It's not like an infection or a bomb. It's selective. I frowned. What he was saying made a lot of sense, but it was still assuming a lot. How do you know that for sure? What aren't you telling me? He looked down, his mouth trembling slightly. I know it because of the odds. Say there are 3,000 of these things out there. Out of over 6 billion people, what are the odds that a specific person would have a seed? Extremely low. But of all those people, against all those odds, I've got one in me. I jerked involuntarily forward, blood rushing in my ears. What? You have what? I had to have heard him wrong. He looked back up at me, tears now welling at the corners of his eyes. They put a seed in me. I know it comes as a shock. And yes, I'm sure I really do have one in me. Let me explain. I'm 77 years old, and I've been at this since I was 45. It's a long time to do anything, but much less something this dangerous. And like I've told you, the key to being successful is in being smart and careful. If you're having to actually fight an outsider, even in human form, you've already made one or more serious mistakes. Just because they aren't physically enhanced when they look like the people they've overtaken doesn't mean that they aren't dangerous. Just like a normal human, they can hurt and they can kill you.
Yeah.
And bear in mind that the mind powering that body isn't the same mind as the person it inhabits. These beings aren't perfect. They can be tricked. They can make mistakes.
Fair enough.
And they can be outsmarted.
So
But they are very intelligent and very ruthless. They do access and utilize the brain and the memories of the person they inhabit, and it seems from my experience to have some impact on their behavior. How they talk even when the mask of emotion is gone, for instance, or how they might go about accomplishing their individual goals. My point is that they're always a threat, regardless of their form, and even when things go well, which they don't always, there's always a physical component to this kind of work. Being stealthy, carrying equipment and bodies, fighting or running when something goes wrong, it takes a toll. In the first 5 years of hunting these things, I lost 30 pounds of fat and gained 20 pounds of muscle. Some of that is
Damn.
I made a point of exercising more to improve my odds against them, but most of it was just the work itself. In some ways, I was healthier in my late 40s and early 50s than I had been in my whole life. But by the time I hit my early 60s, I could feel things starting to slide back the other way. I would get out of breath easier, and I could feel myself getting a little weaker over time. If I got hurt, it took longer for me to come back from it, and my joints weren't as limber anymore.
That's all.
Now, I'd estimate I was still well above average for someone that age, but most people weren't doing the kinds of things I was doing either. And while it concerned me some, it wasn't unexpected. All I could do was mitigate the effects of aging as best I could and keep working on improving how I did my work. Then one day, I got sick all of a sudden. I was in a grocery store and I felt a wave of nausea and dizziness overcome me. I would have fallen if not for the shopping cart I was pushing. I stood there gripping that cart for support long enough for a couple of different people to come over and ask if I was okay. I was able to reassure them and eventually got moving again, but I had to give up shopping and head to the car. By the time I was cranking up, it had faded somewhat. I still felt bad, but I was okay to drive. So I drove home, drank some water, and went to bed. I woke up 12 hours later, and my first thought was to get a feel for how I was doing. Was there any sign of weakness or nausea, of fever? But no, not only did I not feel bad any longer, I felt great. I got out of bed easily, and as I cautiously tested myself, I could tell that I had none of the aches and pains that I would have normally expected after being in bed so long. Over the next few days, the feeling of wellness and strength only grew. My endurance was better than it had ever been, and I could lift as much as when I was 25. I knew this was all abnormal from the start, and I considered that a seed could have been implanted from an early stage, but you have to understand that I was trying to be cautious. I was monitoring myself very closely, and so far I wasn't seeing any negative side effects or indications of anything usurping my control. Plus, seeds didn't make outsiders physically stronger or better in their human form. When I began to worry more about the possibility I had one implanted in me, that was the fact that I could always return to as a way of assuaging my fears or rationalizing them away. Because I admit I didn't want it to be a seed, and I didn't want the way I felt to go away. It was easier to just keep enjoying the benefits and keeping watch for any trouble rather than getting a definitive answer. I had already learned I could detect seeds with an MRI, but when the thought of testing myself would periodically arise, I would always find an excuse for delaying it, waiting until I had gathered more data. I was being foolish and selfish, trying to lie to myself and doing a poor job of that. But then, I got shot in the chest. While I've had several encounters with the House of the Claw over the years, today was only the fourth time I actually had real combat with them. The first time was when I was in my 50s, and the second time was a short time later with the remainder of the first group, which taught me the importance of killing an entire cell when you can. The third time was about 6 months after I had gotten sick in the store and woke up the next day feeling so much stronger. I had hunted down 2 outsiders in that 6-month period, but the second one had a group of the house that were serving it, which I learned a few days later when they ran me off the road. There were only 4 in that cell, and the first 2 I actually managed to run over with my car by playing possum when they approached to see if I was dead. The third started to run, and was actually shot and killed by the fourth as some kind of weird cult court-martial. Then he turned the gun on me. My gun had gotten dislodged from its normal place behind the passenger seat, somewhere between mine getting run off the road and turning the 2 house guys into speed bumps. The fourth member was too close for me to search for the gun and at a bad angle to try and hit him with the car, so my thought was to reach him with my baton before he turned his attention from the cohort he was murdering back to me. I almost made it. I was raising the baton to bring down on his arm when he turned and fired into my chest. His aim wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. The bullet perforated my right lung and went out my back, chipping a rib along the way. I spun from the impact and had the presence of mind to keep turning, whipping the baton into his face as I drew even with him. It struck him with a wet and meaty crunch that dropped him immediately. I fell the next moment, my chest burning painfully with each breath. I knew I likely had only a short time before my lungs started collapsing, so after making sure number 4 was dead, I headed back to my car and started trying to find the duct tape. When you get shot in the chest, one of the biggest risks you face is your lung collapsing. This can be caused by outside air coming through the hole, which stops your lung from being able to expand. This is called a pneumothorax. Another way is that if the area around the lung fills with blood, again, it can't expand. This is called a hemothorax. Either one can cause you to slip into unconsciousness and die. I needed to get to a hospital, but first I needed to do what I could to slow down any collapse. Taking off my shirt, I layered strips of duct tape to make a bandage for my back wound and then for my chest wound. After applying the back bandage with some difficulty, I took an empty ballpoint pen barrel and inserted it into the bullet hole on my chest before sealing and securing it with the remaining strips of tape. The idea is the same as a needle decompression. You are giving the air outside your lungs somewhere to go so you can continue to breathe.
Yep, fair
The
enough.
problem is that what I had done would only help a pneumothorax, particularly when I still had to be upright and driving. My chest cavity and lung could still be filling with blood and kill me just as quickly. I started towards the nearest hospital, but I knew it was over 20 minutes away even if I drove fast, which I wasn't capable of doing. I could feel myself getting weaker and every breath was painful, to say nothing of the gunshot wound itself.
I mean, we know he
I kept
survived.
driving as I tried to think of better alternatives to my current plan, and as I went, I realized I was feeling better. At first, I thought it was my imagination or the onset of physical shock, but as the minutes passed, I could see tangible improvements. The pain was fading, and I wasn't having problems with my breathing. Finally, I pulled over and carefully removed the pen barrel and tape from my chest. The hole actually looked smaller and wasn't bleeding anymore. I gingerly reached back to where the bullet had exited and peeled away the tape. When I probed with my fingers, I found tender but untorn flesh. I started driving again, still headed towards the hospital at this point. My mind was swimming, and I was already chastising myself for not having looked into what was happening to me more, for not finding out if I had been compromised by a seed or some other outside influence. I promised myself that if I survived this, I wouldn't turn a blind eye for convenience's sake ever again. When I reached the hospital parking lot, I looked at my chest again. It was completely healed. I had no pain or problems that I could tell. Instead of going in, I went to my own office and ran tests. I had just started leasing an MRI machine the year before, both for my medical work and my after-hours studies, and it didn't take long for me to find the dark speck lodged in the deep folds of my left temporal lobe. I could have done a lot of different things at that point, killed myself, or tried to have removed it, being two obvious choices. I struggled with the decision and what it meant if I stayed alive and left the seed where it was. My reasoning was ultimately based on a few assumptions. First, it seemed clear that I had been targeted for a seed because, as we discussed before, the odds are far too great to make it likely I got selected for one by chance. but that would mean that they know about me to some extent. Yet I've never had someone assault me at work or home or track me down other than in response to specific actions I took, such as killing an outsider associated with a house sale. Attacks against me seemed to always be about what I had done, not some greater knowledge of who I was or what I had done in the past. Now, that was still a guess. They could have reasons for not attacking me at times while knowing everything about me, but my suspicion was that they targeted people by some means independent of knowing a name or specific address. My experience since then has continued to bear that out. It's almost instinctual, I think, though that instinct is propelled by intellect and purpose. Second, I knew that my newfound strength and resiliency wasn't normal for those that received a seed. Setting aside the possibility of getting a different kind of seed than most, or having some unique property in and of myself that changed the seed's effects, both of which seemed unlikely, all things considered, I found the most likely answer was Salk's blood. Even if they had invaded thousands of people, the odds of any of those having ingested and been altered by an outsider's blood prior to receiving the seed was very unlikely. I couldn't question that Salk's blood had irrevocably changed me. Even long after his blood should have faded from my system, I retained and even farther developed my ability to sense outsiders. It seemed likely that, however it permanently changed my body, also afforded me some level of protection from the seed and granted other benefits as well. Third, I assume that the outsiders themselves, or whoever they call master, did not realize this would happen. I saw little benefit for them in making someone like myself stronger and harder to kill.
Yeah.
If that was correct, it was a sign of their fallibility, and it gave me hope that I could use their attempt to punish and subjugate me against them. For years, that's exactly what I've done, all the time keeping a close check on myself for signs that I was changing or being taken over. For the longest time, I saw none. But about 3 months ago, I started having strange dreams. It started sporadically, but then it became a nightly occurrence. Then, a few days ago, I noticed myself having odd thoughts. You have to understand that whatever my mistakes in all of this, I have truly tried to remain responsible and have trained myself to be hyper-vigilant to any signs of a problem since getting the seed. Part of that has been examining my internal self, going into my inner dark and finding the person who lives there, coming to know them well. I know my thoughts, and some things lately. It's not me. I haven't lost control, not that I can tell, but I can't continue on like this any longer. It's too great a risk to everything I care about, including you. I've made friends over the years. Some are people I have helped. Others are on the inside of this thing like I am and, well, like you are now, at least to some extent. One of those friends is a doctor, not a surgeon really, but I helped save his daughter a few years back, and he owes me. He knows enough, and I've told him enough, that he can do the procedure I've taught him to remove the seed from me. I've never done this procedure on someone before, and I have no way of knowing if it will work. One of several things will likely happen. 1, he will be able to extract the seed with minimal brain damage and no fracture of the seed. If that happens, I will likely live and be okay. 2, he will extract the seed intact, but it will cause significant brain damage, either killing or severely impairing me. That is not my favorite outcome. 3, he will fracture the seed during extraction, and I will get transported either alive or dead to wherever these things come from. Hopefully dead, because I don't think they will greet me warmly. 4, the seed will react to being extracted and either take me over or kill me. Now, there is another possibility in all this. Given our history, I think it's unlikely, but I can't rule it out. If my doctor friend Prakash has been gotten to, he may try to kill me while I'm under. In that event, or if the seed does start taking me over, it would be useful to have an insurance policy. As I can tell, you've already guessed that I'm talking about you. This is nothing you have to say yes to, and I hate the idea of putting you at more risk than I already have. The procedure isn't going to be for 4 more days, so you have time to decide in any case.
Yeah.
My original plan was to help you finish sorting out your folk stuff and then come have the procedure on my own. If I didn't make it, well, I got to spend some time with you and you would hopefully have some good final memories of your grandpa. But things never work out quite like you plan. Your knowledge and involvement today opens up a new possibility, but one that you need to seriously consider before you decide what you want to do. If you say no, I'll spend the time I have with you now if you're willing, and I can always look you up later if things go well. If things don't, well, we'll discuss contingencies before you leave if you decide you want out. If you say yes, then you have to commit to it for not only my sake, but yours. I can't have you in a dangerous situation that you aren't prepared for. What I'm saying is, if you decide to stay in health,
4 days
you have to be
time.
ready to kill my friend. You have to be ready to kill me. You need to think about it for a while before you answer, because this hole only goes deeper and darker the farther in you go. I think I've done some good in my life, but I have no illusions about who it's made me, or more accurately, what it's brought out in me. I'm a killer, and that's not an easy thing to face and live with for a lot of people. It's up to you to go into your inner dark like I did and find the person that's waiting there. See what they are and aren't capable of living with. And if you can embrace that, just remember that when you really find them, past all the bullshit and self-deception, you'll have found something valuable and true. Whether they want to stay or go, kill or run, whether you love them or hate them, that inner self won't lie to you. Sometimes I think that's the worst part. They're so goddamn honest. My grandfather's going to die, and it's my fault. That's the thought that keeps pushing to the surface as I pound on the lab door, screaming for Prakash to let me out, to not do this. I try to force the idea back down. It's a distraction and I need to focus. But it keeps working its way through me like shrapnel driven by some inexplicable need to harm. I step back and slam against the door with my full body weight once, twice, and on the third time I feel my collarbone give way when I hit. Biting back a sob of pain and rage, I beg again through the door for the doctor to leave him alone. But the only answer I receive is silence. I had gone to pick up Prakash from a department store parking lot over an hour away.
Did he just skip it?
He was a small and fidgety man, standing next to his car with a small duffel bag in hand. When I identified myself as Dr. Barron's grandson, he greeted me warmly. And when I handed him the black sack to put over his head and asked him to get in the back so he wouldn't be seen, he nodded without complaint or any sign of surprise. Whether that was because my grandfather had already told him he couldn't know the location of where he was going, or because he was just that compliant, I wasn't sure. I looked through his duffel bag, but it was just a collection of medicines, syringes, and a few other medical supplies that I supposed he brought in case my grandfather had forgotten something that was needed for the procedure. We drove in silence for the most part, other than me periodically asking if he was comfortable enough. And when we arrived back at Jagger Solutions, I carefully led him inside the warehouse where my grandfather was waiting. After patting him on the back and thanking him again for his help, my grandfather led Prakash down to the lower level before finally removing the black sack from the man's head. Prakash had looked dazedly around at the bright lights and new surroundings before focusing on us and smiling. He said he was ready to begin whenever we were, and in less than an hour, my grandfather was in the vault and under anesthesia, strapped down to the same metal table where so many outsiders had lain. I didn't like the look of him on that table. In a hospital gown, asleep and tied down, he looked so vulnerable. As he had instructed, I was standing at the open door to the hatch, gun ready in a holster at the back of my belt. I knew that Prakash had seen the gun, and I had made no attempt to hide it, figuring its presence might serve as a deterrent if he was up to something nefarious after all. But I thought my grandfather was right. Prakash seemed to be a good man who genuinely liked my grandfather and deeply appreciated him saving Prakash's daughter years before. They had talked amiably for a few minutes as my grandfather had gone under, and it seemed natural and heartfelt. As he was fading into unconsciousness, my grandfather had waved me over. When I was close by, he gave my arm a squeeze and met my eyes. "Remember everything we talked about. I love you, and I'm very proud of you." I saw tears forming at the corner of his eyes. "I put a letter for you on my desk in the lab, too. Just wait and read it when this is over, however it turns out." Giving me another squeeze, his eyes began to flutter shut as his hand slipped away. Wiping my own eyes, I went to my post by the vault entrance. While my grandfather had described the procedure to me, I had only understood it at the most basic level, and I assumed it was going to be a fairly long operation. In truth, after Prakash started to work, it was all done in less than an hour. My grandfather had already shaved his own scalp around the surgery site, so after sterilizing the area, Prakash used a surgical saw to cut out a small piece of skull on the left side of his head, setting it aside on one of the rolling instrument trays in the room. He then inserted a thin metal rod that my grandfather had showed me was actually an endoscope, a small camera used in brain surgery. This was followed by a thin hollow tube when he said he had located the seed. A tiny rod ending in an articulate claw was inserted down the tube, with the idea of it being positioned at the other end to safely grab the seed and pull it back through the hollow tube itself and out of my grandfather's brain. As Prakash worked, I felt myself growing tenser and tenser, cool sweat pouring down my back and legs as I waited for it to be finished or for something to go wrong. I kept imagining my grandfather suddenly waking up and trying to attack us as the seed took him over.
Fair enough.
Or perhaps worse, him just disappearing entirely if the seed became damaged during extraction. But nothing like that happened, and when Prakash finally removed the extraction rod, I saw the small metal claw at the end held something small and black. Is he okay?" I blurted out, instantly regretting any distraction I might be causing while surgery was still going on. Prakash didn't turn, but nodded. "He's very strong, and I think it went well. Like your grandfather probably told you, this isn't my specialty, but after I replace the skull door and bandage him up, he should be done." I nodded back before realizing he couldn't see it with his back turned. "Good. That's awesome. Thank you so much for helping us." I thought for a moment I saw Prakash flinch, but he continued to work steadily, and I decided it was my imagination. A few minutes later, he was finished and washing up, and when that was done, he approached me with a small plastic tray. In it was the seed. "He wanted you to store this, I think. In the lab, maybe." I nodded. In the days leading up to this, My grandfather and I had talked about a number of things, but much of the time was spent on showing me features of this place and teaching me more lessons about hunting. Most of it...
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'm so happy the grandfather actually survived this. I am happy they can continue. But also this is quite freaky. I mean, for F's sake, how could you... The seed functioning as it is actually quite interesting. It's a dimensional door, and at the same time it's... Or a portal. Let's just say it like that, acolytes. And at the same time it's some kind of fucking radio. As he said, he actually heard the voices in his head, so... I don't, I think, know what the F this actually is, but hey. At the end of the day, as long as it works, it works. But, as it is, acolytes, good night. And the end, well, the last part will come tomorrow.